My name is Adam W. Rodriguez. Welcome to my channel. I am your host here at the Art of AWR. For this particular video, we are going to be discussing and reviewing the book Carmilla. It is a Gothic vampire book, super early in the vampire genre, and I'm super excited to talk about it. But before I begin, I would like to invite you to subscribe to my channel. I am a performer and a writer and a visual artist of many years. So if you like the idea of a guy who's been in the arts and entertainment industry for 30 plus years doing reviews about literature and art and comic books, subscribe to my channel, maybe even like this video, and then hit that bell so that you get new notifications every time a new video drops. Awesome. Moving on. Carmilla. I remember going through a phase back in college where I started watching butt tons of Hammer films. If you don't know what Hammer films are, they're like these what would be considered now like B-budget horror movies, lots of Draculas and Frankensteins and mummies and stuff like that. And I remember watching a movie called the Vampire Lovers. It was this great Hammer film starring Ingrid Pitt. I loved it. It was awesome. And I had no idea that it was based off of a story, the story Carmilla. But then I came to find out that Carmilla is referenced in so many things. There's art throughout the years, ever since its publication, that has been inspired by the female seductress vampire. There have been so many songs, like a mind-blowing amount of songs written about Carmilla. There's comic books, there's TV, there's web series, there's cartoons. Castlevania on Netflix right now has this kick-ass character that's based off of Carmilla, or at least named Carmilla. And so many other movies besides that Hammer flick that I've been talking about. You're going to see random bits of that Hammer flick throughout this video because I just figured it'd be cool to kind of add it for spice and visual effects. It's one of my favorite depictions of Carmilla, especially now that I've read it, and there is a couple of like scenes that are directly taken from the book. Some of the more interesting and effective scenes as far as I'm concerned. Let's talk a little bit more about the author, J. Sheridan Le Fanu. I thought it was a lady author, and then I saw that J stood for Joseph. He was an Irishman who came from a large family of successful writers. His mother, his grandmother, his uncle, even his niece were all very accomplished playwrights and novelists. He was based out of Dublin, Ireland, and he released Carmilla in 1871 as a serial that ran until 1872, and then he died in his late 50s in 1873, 1 year later after its publication. Carmilla was published 26 years before Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is often considered like the pivotal vampire fiction novel. Before even Carmilla was, of course, Vampyre by Polidori, and even that, you could tell, also Carmilla had an influence on Bram Stoker's Dracula. One of the things that I think is an obvious takeaway as far as Bram Stoker being inspired by Le Fanu's Carmilla is the way that the victims of being bitten by a vampire are affected, how they kind of waste away until they finally pass. The concept of Abraham von Helsing in Stoker's novel was probably, or it seems to me, in my opinion, very much based off of the character of Baron Vordenburg in the Carmilla book, in that they were these vampire-savvy characters who were like leading the charge for hunting vampires. Right now I'm kind of collecting Gothic Horror monsters for my own purposes, and I had kind of ashamed to admit that I hadn't read Carmilla up until now. In fact, I really didn't even know about it. There was a random booktuber who mentioned it, and I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. I don't know anything about that book. And it comes to find out that, you know, Carmilla's been referenced in so many vampire fictions and movies that I've seen that it's crazy that I never understood it. Now, those Carmilla Easter eggs mean so much more now that I've actually read the book. It checks off all the boxes for Gothic literature. You know, you've got your supernatural figure or being. It's got a dark setting. You know, it's like a lonely castle tucked away in the mountains. And it has this air and atmosphere of mystery and superstition all throughout the book itself. I think it's a great Gothic horror piece, and it's exemplary of the genre. Let's talk about the book a little bit. The book is really well done. I think that it has just the right amount of prose and character building to make it a really effective book. One of the things that I think is really cool is that the ladies are so much more fleshed out in this book than the dudes are. The women are a little bit more complex. They're definitely more savvy. A lot of the guys in this book are kind of dopes. The main character's father is pretty clueless most of the time. The doctor who's trying to figure out all these strange maladies of women falling victim to vampire bites. He has no idea what's going on at all times.
Guten Tag, everybody!
Guten Tag, Dr. Nick.
So this particular book was written from the point of view of an 18-year-old young woman named Laura, who is very lonely. Like her mother passed away when she was very young, and she obviously has spent most of her life, if not all of her life, having like a playmate. You know, people just her own age. I mean, she has a governess. There's another servant in the house that's a woman, and then there's her dad, and then there's no one else. At the beginning of the book, she's sort of promised this ward that's going to come and visit the castle, and she'll have someone her own age. And then there's this letter that's received saying that this awful tragedy has occurred, that Ward has died, and now she's not going to get any companionship. So right after that, there's this big accident that happens in front of their castle, or Schloss, as they call it. And they go out, they check, and there's this woman. She's there with her daughter, and this woman has pressing business. She needs to move on, but she doesn't think she can because her daughter is injured from the accident. So the father takes it upon himself to volunteer taking in the daughter so that the woman can go and carry on her business and later come back for her child. This child that they take in is Carmilla, who ends up being this mysterious beauty who doesn't wake up until the afternoon and often doesn't dine with them during the day. Carmilla and Laura develop this relationship. It gets very, very deep and meaningful, and Laura is in awe, and she is also repelled by Carmilla. It's this kind of wonderful, dichotomy of thought. They leave it up to you to kind of decide what the repulsory reaction is coming from, and as a reader, it feels as if it's because she's truly a monster, that she's hiding something from Laura. And it kind of plays into that kind of subtle homoeroticism that's going on throughout the whole thing. I mean, it might not be so subtle for some. But what I do like is that it doesn't feel like they're villainizing homosexuality in this book. It's strange, especially considering the time. I mean, we're talking about late 1800s Dublin, Ireland. I mean, this isn't long, not long after is when like Oscar Wilde is imprisoned just for his, sexuality. So it was really cool that they were presenting homosexuality in a way that wasn't terribly negative. I mean, it was certainly presented like taboo, but it wasn't bad. Like it was still it was more mysterious and alluring. Let's talk about Carmilla a little bit. Now, Carmilla is a really great monster. She's a wonderful monster. I just recently read Dracula and Phantom of the Opera, so I'm going to do a little bit of comparing because those are the, Gothic monsters that are currently in my brain right now. After reading Phantom of the Opera, 300 some odd pages, maybe 60 of those pages were interactions with the actual Phantom of the Opera. 500 bloody pages of Dracula, and I might have gotten 80 pages of people actually in the room interacting with Dracula. But in Carmilla, about 80% of the time, Carmilla is present, interacting with characters in the book, and you get to actually know the monster better. Now, the sympathetic monster that didn't come around, I don't think, until after Carmilla. I think Carmilla was one of the first sympathetic vampires. I never read Polidori's Vampyre, but what I have read like summaries and stuff like that, and he's just kind of a beast. He's a predator, you know. In this one, Carmilla is wrestling with herself, with her true feelings for Laura, but also, you know, having to wrestle with the monster that she is, you know, just the inevitability of horror and death that she represents. And I think that's really awesome. It creates an air of sympathy for the monster. I mean, you know she's a creature, but she has this human side, and that human side is easy to connect with. When I read Bram Stoker's Dracula, he didn't really have that. He was just kind of like this goblin with a unibrow. She is a sexy-ass woman who is wrestling with her feelings for one of her meals, and I think that's really awesome. The book itself has wonderful moments that Lafanu creates these scenes, and he allows them to breathe, and he allows both Laura and Carmilla to build, to become more complex, and I really appreciate that about the book and the main characters.
Stop it! Stop it!
Carmilla, what is it?
Nothing. Only that dreadful noise.
The funeral. But it's the woodman's daughter.
I hate funerals. Hate them!
I thought it rather sad, and yet beautiful.
You must die. Everybody must die.
Honestly, I know I go on and on and on about character complexity, and I need that more in books, but to be honest, I'm not too hard to please. You just give me a character flaw, you give me some weaknesses, you give me some fears, and all of a sudden your character is a little bit more fleshed out, a little bit more complex, and then my need for complexity in characters is sated. The horror in this book is actually pretty well done. There are some chilling moments, and like chilling moments on things that aren't necessarily like jump scare things. It was very atmospheric, like how the shape-shifting happens in the book. There's a moment of shape-shifting where I'm like, wow, that was chilling. That was really great. And when they finally, you know, come to hunt and destroy Carmilla, there's this wonderfully picturesque bit of prose that goes into that. That's just very creepy and just good Gothic literature. I mean, I really think this is an excellent book. It might come as a shock because I have yet to give a 10 to any of the books that I've reviewed on my channel, but I think Carmilla is a solid 10. It's got everything you expect it to have, and it gives you a little bit more, and I think that that's pretty awesome. It could be that as I read it, I began to understand just how much influence this book has had over several generations of artists and interpretations of vampire literature and vampire lore. I think that might have even helped it cross that finish line into that 10. Just to seeing what a foundational book this is in Gothic horror and vampire literature. And I mean, honestly, there's not a lot of vampire books that I'm terribly fond of, which is strange because I love monsters and I love Gothic literature. But like, Carmilla is probably the best vampire book I've read. I mean, it's super short, so it doesn't have a lot of time to suck. You know what I mean? Oh, hey, I see what I did there. But it doesn't. He does a great job, and he creates a monster that I find myself sympathizing with a little bit and fearing a little bit, and that doesn't happen. I seldomly get chills reading books, and this one gave me a couple. So, you know, hats off to Lefanu, especially a book as old as it is. The fact that it was written in like the 1870s and the language being as easy to understand as it is kind of baffling in a way. Some of those old books, you know, the language is odd, the phrasing is odd, but nope, this book was real easy to tear through. This is 100 pages. and I took my time reading it over 3 or 4 days, and I enjoyed being able to just kind of drink in every little scene that was done. This is a solid 10, you guys, a 10. I have never done a 10 so far. My first 10 on The Art of AWR, Carmilla, by Joseph Sheridan LaFonu. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. This has been my review of Carmilla, a sweet, badass vampire novella, and I hope that we see you next time here at The Art of AWR. See you next time, y'all.